Very good.
So what's Sunday though?
Pool party, you have to get naked at Peter's house.
You're being given misinformation.
We're online.
But that is not.
You can get naked at Peter's house.
Oh, we're broadcasting.
We're broadcasting.
Oh, sorry.
Well,
Should have said something.
She said something.
yeah, I got hypnosis for the Sunday and my daughter on Wednesday. But what time is the party? Because Ben's been asking me.
We're online.
What? Sunday 12. Look at the calendar. It's on the calendar.
Yes.
He doesn't really get in the calendar.
Come to the party.
So Peter, I've been paying attention to this, the riding the wave, the like, not nothing but something, but not something. In terms of, it seems that there is something I can apprehend in some way in which I can appear to direct my energy in a certain way that is different from this throwaway nothingness that has been, part of my spiritual, or is that's how I perceive, the path of Buddhism, for example, where it is a nothing, and then try and kind of pull something down. So it feels like there is this working in relationship with this,
Yeah,
energetically.
yeah, absolutely.
And so that's been an interesting experience recently, that I'm paying attention to.
Experience is a very intimate and very comprehensive engagement.
Yes.
But it's an irrational engagement. You can't make sense of it. If you try and make sense of it, then you deviate from what it really is and fall into some fantasy about it, which is not going to be true.
Right.
But the more you're just sort of with it as a flow without trying to parse it into something as a logical structure or something that makes sense or something you can really have a clue about even, then you can be with it much
Also notice how nothing has been a good excuse
oh sure
for not doing something,
yeah
even though I don't know what something is. But,
sure.
or else the helplessness of this nothing, the sort of fact that I, in some ways, have felt at times like I'm not actually engaged in something, and that I'm at the mercy of, being, and actually I see in a very subtle way that's not, it never happen anyway, it would never be true.
Yeah.
But then we're working with that sort of directionally.
Yeah. No, this is very very much a positivity. It's very much a something, but it's not a specific something. It's not a something that you can specify or define or even indicate. But it's absolutely what it is, and the degree to which it can be engaged with it intimately is absolutely across the board. But every aspect of that is intrinsically irrational and undefinable and unresolvable and so on and so forth. And so the more you can be with it in that sort of relaxed, relaxed yet engaged mode, the more across the board efficiently and artfully you'll be with it.
Well, and as you say, sometimes it shows you what it is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
When you actually make the food.
Oh, absolutely.
Sort of like the wild bear.
Sure.
Or something.
It's like, well, that's what learning is, and learning has always been that. Humans have all sorts of philosophies and theories about learning is stimulus and response and this, that, and the other. But in actuality, learning is that this showing you what it is. And by participating with this intimately, it shows you how to participate with it intimately. And it becomes a feedback cycle where you become, the more you do it, the better you become at it. And this holds true equally and perhaps especially for being with it in a more pure mode, the way it is, as undefined and irrational and non-specific. I mean, it's not it's very specific, but it's not. It's open-ended, let's call it.
Because in fact, you have to sort of apprehend in some way what this is in order to engage in that. Otherwise, there is that grasping of something that doesn't appear to be there.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is sort of what we do in a lot of spiritual
Yeah.
practices.
Yeah.
Attempt to have some sort of glimpse of this through holding ourselves in a certain way.
Yeah. But that's why, you know, some familiarity with some form of noticing is essential, because one has to, you know, to some extent see what this is in order to see the validity of letting go of all these imaginary templates that the normal human mode is oriented towards using in terms of approaching functioning. And normal human functioning is I'm supposed to know what I'm trying to do. I'm supposed to have some idea how to do it, and I'm, you know, supposed to have some process. And so there's all of these maps and templates that one holds that are all completely inaccurate. And so, but with any degree of even beginning noticing that, wow, wait a minute, there's something here that is actual, it's genuine, but it has a fundamentally irrational and unresolvable mode, and then you have your foot in the door, so to speak, to sort of begin being with it that way. At which point it shows you how to be with it that way, you know, in a feedback building arc of artfulness.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because the material world, in some ways, seems to have ground to us sort of the old. You know, like I was saying the other day about the footprint getting smaller. The apparent footprint of my life seems to be much smaller than it ever was, in terms of it, you know, that I just don't show up anywhere.
And yet material functioning comes with and shows up as a byproduct of this engagement.
Yeah.
So by being with
still
this,
getting done.
yeah, by being with this as it is, essentially transcendentally, everything happens. You know, bills get paid to the extent they need to, and you know, whatever things happen.
Yeah, like in the tarot, I mean, the discs, which basically represent most of the material, are like 25% of the deck.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not 25%, but 25% of the regular cards. And then a lot of the trump cards have to do with it too. And so, you know, when those show up, they're usually combined with some other aspect of this. But they're there, and sometimes they're totally present. You know, financial worries, for instance, are, you know, you can't make this disappear, financial problems sometimes. So. It was actually sort of interesting how the material aspects, if you really think about them, are part of this.
Of course,
I mean, this is doing that.
Yeah, exactly so. This is doing that.
So,
And yet, the mode of this is fundamentally immaterial.
exactly. Yeah.
And yet, materiality is an aspect. You know, what we may define as materiality is a sort of an aspect or a subcategory of what this is and the way this
Sure, I mean,
appears.
like air or, you know, astrology or tarot. I mean, sort of sort of, like you can identify that with ideas or your mind and your consciousness. But that's just part of this experience.
What do you mean by this is fundamentally immaterial?
What is happening here is not materiality is, let me see if I better put this. Apparent materiality happens because this is happening, not the other way around. And what this is fundamentally, non-material. Or let's say not dependent upon it. Materiality is dependent upon what this is. This is not dependent upon materiality. So, yeah, so materiality is like a shadow. I mean, to use a very vague metaphor, materiality, material phenomena is like a shadow being cast by another phenomena. And this other phenomena is casting that shadow, and the phenomena does not depend upon the shadow, but the shadow depends wholly upon the phenomena.
Okay.
So in terms of functioning, the more one artfully is with this as it is, transcendentally, which is essentially, amaterially. It doesn't negate materiality, but it's not dependent upon explicitly material modes. The more one is with this as it is, amaterially, the more material function will take care of itself and fall into line, and the more efficiently one will be dealing with what this actually is. Whereas if one tries to function exclusively materially, by material orientation, one's missing an enormous aspect of this actuality and is liable to run afoul to various degrees. Because to try to assess what's going on and try to assess the way it is going on strictly through material symptoms or material phenomena is going to be very misleading in terms of the actual phenomena of what's happening here. And analogously, it's in exactly the same way that to understand what is happening when dreamings occur, if you look at the phenomena of what's appearing in the dream and try to deduce dreaming from that, it'll take a bit of a stretch to really do that well.
And that whole section is like suddenly all this grasping wanted to show up and like, wow, can I control this? Can I make things happen? And then I think I realized I'm thinking about moving, and where to move. Just literally, I got the spelling of the area that I need to live in. Just kind of started spelling itself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, it's spelling itself out.
Right. Sure, that's an example.
And I need a new car, and I got this really intense message from my father about what kind of car it would make him happy. And then I drove a cheaper car today. I was like, oh, yeah, this doesn't feel right. It's like, okay.
Oh, that's funny.
It's
Is
like,
your dad gonna pay for the more expensive car?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a good
so-
question.
Well, okay then.
but it's just really kind of interesting in that having had a pretty rough financial situation for many years, it's like it's asking me that identifying with that. It's like I'm comfortable not identifying with having them,
Right.
but apparently I'm not comfortable with not identifying with not having very much at all. Just that is, and it's like, but that's identification also.
Well, identification per se is not an issue. The issue is much more orientation. Identification kind of happens across the board. Experience is, to some degree, identification. But the subtlety or artfulness with which one orients can be more or less accurately to what's actually happening. And if one orients towards life, let's say, if one orients towards one's life, strictly by material logic and material hypotheses, you're diverging enormously from the lion's share of what's actually happening here. Whereas if you stumble onto orienting to this in a more true way, the material functioning will come along for the ride. It's not a matter of negating it. It's not a matter of not identifying with it. It's a matter of orienting to, to what's actually going on. It's like having a compass that points north. Then you know where north is, so you're oriented. And to use very, very sloppy language, what's going on here is an event that in consciousness that works the way consciousness works. It's not an event that is going on in matter that works the way matter works.
Yeah.
Consciousness works the way consciousness works, and matter comes along for the ride because consciousness is doing matter, not the other way around, as the materialist hypothesis would hold it. Materialist hypothesis is consciousness is a byproduct of matter. You line up matter a certain way, and all of a sudden you get these biochemical reactions in central nervous systems, and then all of a sudden there's this little spark. But in actuality, it's exactly the opposite. Consciousness, and this is very sloppy language. Consciousness is the root field. Consciousness is the unified field of physics. And all phenomena that occur as aspects of or epiphenomena of consciousness itself. So if you want to understand matter, you have to understand consciousness, not the other way around.
I was thinking today that this corpse is already dead, and so and it will. I mean, it just is. It's already dead because there's only now, and but consciousness is always is forever. So why identify with this corpse, which is dead already, when I can identify with consciousness?
And again, identification per se isn't really the issue because it's not like you need to not identify with your body. It is your body, and you can identify with it the way you do, but that's not the center of things. That's just an aspect. That's just a partial aspect of what's happening.
Perhaps online is the better word.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's important to. I mean, all of this stuff is really fundamentally about coming to align to actuality the way it is, as opposed to aligning to a skewed or partial theory of it or model of it. And if you align yourself to an inaccurate model of actuality, then everything you try and do in accordance with that model is going to deviate from the way things actually are. So to one extent or another, you're going to run afoul of your own inherent functioning. Whereas, on the contrary, if you're orienting to the way things actually are, then if any running afoul will be part and parcel of the way things actually are, so it'll be something that's supposed to be occurring, let's say, so to speak. I mean, very sloppily.
Yeah.
Speaking.
I mean, the other stuff is supposed to occur also.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was like, I had a day where I was like really determined. I wanted to get, not determined, that's the wrong word, but I had work I wanted to get done, and there was just not gonna happen. And I was like, I remember I just read recently in John Klein that when effort is necessary, effort will appear. And I was like, okay, well, if it's not appeared, it's not necessary.
Exactly.
Not necessary, because it doesn't get done.
What did you say, it's not necessary?
Yeah, if it's not appearing, then it's not necessary. And it was like, okay, so I can do it, because I mean, I've been, my dad died 2 weeks ago, and I just did this soul retreat. My car died this weekend, and I did this soul retrieval workshop this weekend, and I was like, I guess I'm just not ready to work yet, whether I think I am or not.
These are things that you mentioned, understanding consciousness.
Yes.
How do you do that?
Well, it's important, it's imperative to understand consciousness, but as I said, the language is very sloppy. It's not really about understanding, it's not really about consciousness.
Okay.
But that was a very sloppy, vague, metaphorical way to put it. But one discovers sort of, let me see if I can put it better.
Word is.
And can you not just say consciousness is not understanding?
I'm not thinking of a really clear way to put it. I mean, what keeps coming to mind for me is center of gravity. When you're oriented to the actual center of gravity, then everything lines up to that. But that's more precise, but I don't know how particularly helpful that is, because it might be sort of vague. In terms
Well,
of
it's
being
very
useful.
specific, actually. I mean,
Yeah, I think
it gives
so.
you some actual focus.
Yeah, well, you understand what I mean.
I
think.
understand what you mean.
Yeah, but it's difficult to try
I
to
just
put into
I'm
words
lost.
because it's so irrational and so non-verbal.
I'm at a loss.
You know,
Understand
it's really coming to it's less about understanding and more about participation.
Yes.
And participation is more about, you could sort of metaphorize it as, being in the flow of experience.
Well, for instance, right between when John asked that question, and you said, well, let me think of a way I can phrase it. There was some silence. And then we just sort of all went into it, and I saw it immediately. But and I was saying, oh, maybe Peter will say that. But, of course he can't because it's unsayable. But during that moment, I knew it. I don't know about yes.
No, it's something one comes to know by learning to not devalue it or negate it because it's not in a category that is ordinarily valued by human philosophies. It's the value, the power, and the intrinsic intelligence of presence, which is not something that humans consider that the base zero. It's a given. Okay, yeah, there's presence, there's existence. Like that's just sort of the foundation. It's basically a non-entity. It's just sort of an absolute given. It's like a 0 point with zero value. But in actuality, it's the other way around. That's where all value is, and that's where all intelligence and all qualities whatsoever inhere in presence itself. And presence is not an abstraction. Presence is your presence, this presence. And it's not a non-entity. On the contrary, it's extremely palpable, it's extremely obvious, but it's not addressable according to normal human categories. It's not addressable according to try and make sense of it or try and describe it or trying to, put it into logic or words. And yet, presence is so obvious and so palpable just by having the notion that, wait a minute, presence is not so far from being a non-entity. Presence is what it's all about. Presence is where the power is. Presence is where the force is. Presence is where the intelligence is. Just knowing that, then that becomes a riddle or a koan. You can say, okay, so here's this presence. Show me your stuff, and it will. But it won't show you in a way that makes sense. It won't show you in words. It won't show you in a way that your mind can get a handle on. But it will show you how to be with it as it is, because you already are with it as it is. Although we're so insensitized to that because we're typically so seduced into more common human modes of, abstraction and our ideas of who we are and what we're doing and what the world is and so on and so forth.
It's interesting though that even though you say yes, that's always with us. That's the way it is. That's what it is. And so it would seem, following from that, yes, we should all be recognizing we were all enlightened. But
Well, you can be.
grace is something that has to happen.
Yeah.
Recognition is such a great word.
Yeah, it's recognition. Because typically people are so brainwashed into being misled about what's valuable and what's important, which is diametrically away from what's actually powerful and what's actually important. And because of this seduction into this misorientation, it can be difficult to tear oneself away from that, because typically it's been a lifelong heavy-handed brainwashing and all this bullshit. It's inaccurate models of things. And so to stumble on something, the actuality, which is so radically other than that, so inherently irrational, so inherently non-human, although it includes all human modes, but it includes them by transcending them, being utterly beyond them. That's the grace is having the karmic fortune to somehow, by hook or by crook, see around all of this intense brainwashing.
Yeah, well, there's a really famous novel, I think it was written in the 70s, by a man named Gaddis. It's called Recognitions. And he just went through every single cultural form, art, Disney World, music. But what he was doing is he was looking at patterns. And he was showing how patterns can bring us, to some kind of recognition. But the main thing is like a lot of the heroes, they just go crazy when they, supposedly, this is like in my acid days and I would do this. There has to be some place between like a metaphor or a pattern where you get to the raw this.
Yeah.
And that is the way. That is the grace. Whatever you
Sure, you can, yeah, definitely. I mean, you have to discover this. You can't get to discovering this until you discover this. So you have to get your foot in the door.
That's what's so weird. I mean, how did I get here? I mean, I remember going and talking to you at Open Secret, saying, what is this bullshit? I kept on it and I kept on listening, and then something happened, and it happened actually after one of your talks, but maybe it would have happened anyway. I don't know.
Who knows? But method or process is unimportant.
No.
It's the event that is of all importance. Yeah. And all it is again recognition of what you are, what this is, the recognition of this presence.
Yeah, and it went away, and a lot of times it still goes away. I mean, I've been in some bad states, as you know, for the last 2 or 3 months, and it's sort of like, Jesus, having his doubts, I mean, I've been going, but it's
going away from it is one of its modes. It goes away from itself. Its nature is to go away from itself.
Actually, it was very informative that I realized that was what was happening. But it wasn't fun, but
I think that's funny, right?
I recognize it as that's just part of it.
Exactly. And that's when you begin to have a mature recognition that when you see the way in which not recognizing it is it.
Right.
And then, because that recognizing it as it is fairly obvious,
Right.
but that But the not recognizing it is also it.
Yeah.
That's what actual realization looks like.
Yeah, well, my son, is a real practicing Buddhist, and, so we spent some time talking about Buddhist suffering, and I could sort of relate to that, I mean, that's, in a way, is what was sort of, a real practicing Buddhist. Not one of those sorted and shit suffering. Yeah. I'm sorry, I used to do that Buddhist thing. But that really is true. I just, even as though I'm doubting, I was never like that. I knew that was not true. Somehow this just came in my face.
And I think sometimes it's helpful when someone has a really good, clear understanding right on them. So they recognize all the things that don't, nothing of our stories or definitions or anything fit into that understanding. So if you start dropping away every time you say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't jive with this understanding I have, there's a good likelihood of suddenly getting it, because you're throwing away all the stuff that aren't so.
Yeah, but you can also sort of ride
You
the
can come at
surfboard
it
of
every
the
way.
suffering too. I mean, you
Well,
can
sure.
just sort of, you just take it for what it is, and that's what is happening right now. That's what's happening to me. It's not even happening to me. That's what's happening. Me is out of the picture, which makes it easier.
That's the idea.
So, Peter, when you talk about things like looking at the wall and seeing the light show or something like that, that's the same sort of thing. You're asking presence to show you how to be with it. Is that?
Well, ultimately, yes. It's really more of a introductory exercise to notice that your actual experience doesn't conform to the way we usually think it functions. To notice the way your actual experience is very dynamic, very slippery, very unstable. And once you become sensitized to that, then you'll notice how all your experience is always like that, without requiring the special circumstance of, the relatively artificial mode of looking at a wall or something. Because the whole psychology of perception, the mind creates a virtual stability in its imagination, even as your actual experience, your eyes are moving around and just everything's changing all the time. But the mind creates a virtual stability where no, the room is just here, it's sitting there, even though there's flashing around, the room's not moving. And this is, the wall is really sitting there, even though every time I look at it, I see something different. Nothing's really happening. The wall's just sitting there inert and stable. So the mind creates this virtual stabilizing sort of dampening effect, which hypnotically desensitizes your perception to how absolutely unstable it is and how absolutely dynamic it is. And so this kind of an exercise is just a beginning exercise to begin to notice that this stability that we ordinarily and spontaneously supply to our experience actually isn't there. It isn't there experientially. And so once you train in that, develop a certain amount of sensitivity to that, so you can notice at any time when you're just with your experience, the way in which your experience is actually very slippery and very dynamic and very incoherent. Let's say certainly much more. It's not absolutely incoherent necessarily, but it's much more incoherent than we're used to letting ourselves notice it is. So you're training in sensitivity to noticing that, and once you can be with the dynamism of experience and the slipperiness of experience as it is, then you're more equipped to begin to look at this and let it show you what it is, so to speak. Because you're basically disarming this imaginary mechanism that happens in the mind, where it creates a virtual dampening effect and a virtual stability on the experiential field that isn't actually there. It's not actually being experienced. It's being imposed in imagination, but the mind typically doesn't know that. It becomes hypnotically, self-verifying objective facts. It just, no, this is all stable and it's just sitting there and nothing's,
So it's as if we have this assumption usually that the way to be with this is to impose some sort of stability on
Right.
it, or some sense of stability.
Yeah,
on it.
and it's unconscious. I mean, it's just, I think it's a normal human mode. But
Okay,
so that this is to counteract that, to sort of be able to turn that off, so that you can be with experience more nakedly as it is, very dynamically, very unstably. And so you're basically increasing your own sensitivity to what you're actually experiencing in real time. And then you're equipped. Then you have the tools because then you're seeing this, and then you're equipped to let this show you what it is, or to notice what this is, because you're actually seeing this more as it actually is.
So Peter, so you use this term human mode, or we've also talked about delusion or illusion. Is that this, or is that
No, that's this.
Intelligence creating this?
Yeah. Oh no, this does that. Is doing that too. All of that is done by this.
So maybe if I was like an insect or something on this earth, there would be something different about it.
Oh, absolutely. But that's your problem when you're an insect.
Yeah, well, I know. But I'm just trying to say. I mean, I'm just trying to say that that a lot of spirituality talks about the mind, or the human consciousness. All of that is an obstacle.
No, it's not an obstacle.
It's just this.
The obstacle is not seeing it in its true proportion.
Right. Exactly.
As an aspect of this.
Right.
This is hard to recognize because it presents itself simultaneously in so many mutually existing modes that are mutually contradictory.
Yeah.
Experience is, huh?
But not exclusive.
They're not actually exclusive, but they may seem to be exclusive because they're so radically different from each other. And typically, the human mode, the deluded mode, and the mode of normalcy is to pick sides and pick a subsection of mode and declare that that's home base, and basically censor everything else and ignore it and pretend it's not there, which is how the conscious mind gets created in the context of the so-called unconscious mind, which is just an arbitrary name for everything that's been censored, and hence is not being acknowledged or perceived, just through a kind of a pseudo-hypnotic, or maybe actually hypnotic mechanism of devaluing it into essential non-existence, virtual non-existence.
I was reading there's a quote from some neurophysicist or something, where he was talking about why science is so opposed to religious. And he said, what if there is something part of the human consciousness or human mind that produces delusion? You know, and so why would science want to try and argue, you know, against this human quality of, say, a belief or a faith, you know, in a religion? And I mean, if that of our human, you know,
Of course.
karma,
True science studies everything inclusively.
yeah. So
And basically that's
human
what we're,
karma is part of it,
of course, and that's what we're advocating here
right?
is absolute science.
Right.
You know, which is, you know, look at what is really happening here. You know, how is it happening? To what degree is it possible to engage with that in an inclusive, raw, naked, accurate, or let's say non-deviated, not unnecessarily deviated mode?
Right.
And you know, my assertion is it's possible to go right to it, to be right with it.
Yeah.
And it includes everything, because it's doing religion, it's doing delusion, it's doing, you know, denial of itself, it's doing all of that, because those are some of its, those are major modes.
It's just a giant oil painting, and it depends on where you're looking at the painting, what you see.
Oh, yeah, could be art.
What?
Could be art.
Yeah, exactly. Triptych.
So once I get past the introductory sort of practice and get sensitized and get the tools and so on, then it's like I start with the assumption that I don't know how to be with this, but I
No assumption. Once you're cast adrift, and then it's sink or swim.
Yeah.
It's more analogous to learning to swim by being thrown in the deep end. Because once you lose the training wheels of this mental orienting unconscious facility, once you've turned that off or gotten yourself outside it somehow, then you don't know where you are, you don't know what's happening. And so your natural mode is, what the fuck's going on here? Oh my God. And so that natural engagement that's it. And then you will look for yourself, and you will discover in the way that you do discover, and that's that. But at least you've been pushed out the door, or pushed into the deep end, so to speak.
Drowning doesn't seem to be any worse than not drowning.
So it's not a matter of process, it's a matter of having all process stripped away from you. It's to essentially orientationlessness. And then like, oh, whoa, wait a minute, hold the phone, what's going on? And that's the mode. That's when you can discover.
And I suppose you eventually get oriented to orientationlessness.
Yes, because that's the true orientation. The nature of what this is has no intrinsic orientation, and yet it spins off myriads, infinite orientations, virtually, constantly, spontaneously. And all of these orientations present within experience. But they're all virtual orientations. None of them is the actual orientation, which is the orientationlessness within which they all appear, you know, from which they all appear, one might say, and to which they all collapse. But, you know, that's getting a little too much mechanism in there. But yeah, you orient to orientationlessness, which is the actual condition. And once you're comfortable with orientationlessness, then you have a clear orientation to what's really going on in order to see it in its proper proportion. And then it becomes very obvious and clear, and everything just falls into place. Because you're not trying to orient to these partialities, all of which are going to skew everything like crazy in terms of you trying to get a handle on things.
Yeah, I'm beginning I did this soul retreat for the whole weekend, and it was really great. And so I have like this kind of orientation to kind of the realm that works in showing up, and I'm like, well, I don't want to get too stuck with that.
Yeah.
I'm afraid it's going to ruin this, but it can't ruin this.
No orientation is negated. All orientations are included. So
I'm afraid I'm going to lose the orientation to,
No.
but I'm not gonna.
No.
But my nature is to that. My old habit is to always be afraid that I'm going to lose something.
Well, if you get seduced into a partial orientation, you basically become a fanatic. That can happen, and even when that happens, you haven't actually lost anything, but you're more or less severely hampered in terms of recognizing the true perspective, which is much easier to recognize in relative orientationlessness, which again is not the opposite of orientations. It includes all in any orientation, but it all transcends them as well. So it's a very peculiar it's a peculiar condition because it includes everything, but it does not settle into being any of them exclusively. And the problem with fanaticism is when you take a partial orientation and you say, this is it, everything is this.
Yeah, where everything's a nail.
Yeah. And that is what delusion looks like. And again, delusion is reality. So you haven't even lost anything then, but because of the intrinsic fanaticism of that orientation, of that exclusive orientation, you tend to have blinders on in terms of noticing anything else, and an infinite amount of anything else is what we got. So in order to orient to what's really here, there has to be you have to be open to the anything else portion. So anything is fine, but anything else is also here.
Right.
It's the exclusivity that makes it an entrapment.
Well, I'm good.
Yeah, good, cool. And so and in that context, all of these partial modes turn out to be useful as far as they go. I mean, it's kind of like you use Western medicine when it's appropriate, and you use homeopathy when it's appropriate, and you pray to angels when it's appropriate, and you use aromatherapy when it's appropriate, because each of these modes may or may not have value. None of them actually negate the others. But when you say, no, Western medicine is based on science, all the rest of it is a bunch of hogwash, then you're a fanatic. You have blinders, and you've locked yourself into tunnel vision, which again is intrinsically okay. You haven't actually lost anything even when that happens, but from within that context, it can be much, much more challenging to notice the true perspective. And if you're interested in noticing the true perspective, then you have to sort of leave your options open. You have to leave the door open to alternatives. Because the rule of thumb is more another. So anything that presents, there's also more another than that. And if you have more another as a formula, it goes right to absolute comprehensiveness. And it doesn't negate anything. Anything is fine, but there's also more another. Or you can say anything exists in the context of more another. Or anything includes more another.
Like everything else, more other is unfindable.
Well, yeah, because it gets to this, which is absolutely and intrinsically undefinable. It's unresolvable. Its very essence is its unresolvability.
That's a given.
This is great. The line before that I wrote was, all partiality needs to be seen through.
Well, there you go.
I was born out. They go together, don't they? No, it's from a week ago. I can only keep 7 words in my head at this time.
No, that's very practical. Be essential. Why not?
I was going to ask you about denial, Peter, because sometimes I become aware of things that I previously had not consciously allowed myself to know.
Sure.
And then I have a bit of a superstition about the fact that when I know them consciously, they'll have more power than they did before.
You have more what?
It's probably the other way around, but yeah.
Do you have
If
anything
anything.
to say about that?
Well, the superstition is absurd.
Yeah.
Denial is essentially a game that consciousness plays with itself, and it can play both sides of that. So it can play the denial at all costs game, or it can play the let go of denial and then yeah. So, but that's just sort of the other side of the same coin.
Well, it's been marketed well with psychology, of course, that whole. So,
But basically, denial is like anything else. Denial itself is not a problem, but don't deny that there's denial. So, if you're a partial personality and you've got a fragile ego structure that depends upon denial, that's fine, but just see it. See that that's the case. Don't pretend that's not the case. Throw open all doors. You don't need to change anything to see what it is. And this holds true in terms of psychological modes as well. There's nothing wrong with denial, but don't be in denial about the denial.
right.
Own it.
It's like, I'm not comfortable with that. Okay, cool.
Yes.
So then you're not comfortable with that, and bang, that's but all of a sudden you're not like, no, I am perfectly comfortable with that when you're not comfortable with it.
Yeah.
I think it's a real cornerstone of the practical aspect of this yoga is nothing needs to be changed. Just see what it is. Because we're so indoctrinated into self-improvement and fixing this and stopping that and do it this way and stop doing it that way and all this kind of stuff, even very subtly.
Right.
And it's just not about any of those modes. And it's not about even negating any of those modes. Those modes are all fine, but just see. It's all about seeing. It's like look down from above and see everything. See the maze and see the stuckness and see it, but you don't need to get out of it, just see it. And in the seeing, one discovers what there is to discover, which turns out to be astounding. It turns out to solve all problems without actually addressing any of them.
Well, that seems to be the ultimate denial, isn't it? The denial of reality, that we think everything is look closely and see that this in fact is the truth, then that's mind blowing because it kind of trumps all the other denials.
Yeah.
And socks. Well, okay, just under it.
So my assumptions on whatever products of brainwashing, those are not essential aspects of what you call a screen.
They are aspects of it, but they're not essential aspects.
And
The kind of stuff the screen is made of.
that they're made of what the screen.
Assumption, beliefs, patterns, all the moving, all the passing of experience, wouldn't you say, Peter?
No, I don't like this made of image. It presents a
Well-
complexity.
Why not? In
Don't
effect-
follow it.
In effect, that is what delusion is seeing only what's on the screen rather than seeing.
Well, it depends what he's meaning by screen.
Well, when you talk about the screen, like when I try to do some yoga exercises, I'll look for some sense of the screen, you know.
Right.
And
The screen in the sense of the metaphor of all this is a movie, right? So you try and see the screen that it's on.
yeah,
In that
what,
sense.
what is the essential thing? Because it seems like I notice other things, but don't really get to the thing itself.
Yeah. The nature of the screen is it endlessly presents us other things. So when you see the other things, you're seeing the screen. But you're not seeing the screen in its essence, you're seeing the screen in its function. You know, I call this radiant presence. And the radiance and presence are one thing. There's not presence and then radiance. Radiant presence is one thing. The presence is the screen, and the radiance is all of this noise, all this information, all this astounding experiential phenomena that are continually cascading around spontaneously and unstoppably. And that's what presence does. Presence makes radiance. But in making radiance, nothing has actually been made, and the radiance doesn't go anywhere because the radiance never departs from the screen any more than the movie departs from the screen. You know, you can be watching the movie and there's all this amazing stuff going on, but the movie's actually just sitting right smack on that screen. It's not actually going anywhere. And likewise, all the radiance, all of this phenomena, all this stuff is the screen. That's where the screen is. It's what the screen is. And if you look very closely, very sensitively at any experiential phenomena, you'll discover a very strange thing. It's not really it. It's not really anything. And in going through any actual experiential phenomena, you find the screen, you find the presence, because that's all it really is. But the way in which that's so, you have to experience it because it doesn't make sense. It's like looking into a fractal.
So something you were saying like 20 minutes ago reminded me of supposedly like Nisargadatta, his guru told him to just notice presence or the sense of the eye all the time, and he did that for 2 years and then he got. Couldn't I just notice presence?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And just do that?
Yeah, that'd be a really good thing to do, especially because
Totally
in the course of doing it, you need to learn how to do it, and eventually it would show you how to do it. And when that happened, you would have discovered it.
And then you discovered confidence.
Yeah, well, that's another thing.
Did you say, John?
You discovered confidence. Interesting.
He was ignored, John.
I'm used to it.
You're
This lively rabble rousers.
John always has the punchline.
But yeah, absolutely. If you're gonna do that. Here's present. This is present, right? And you don't need to get too precious about what does presence mean. No, just feel presence. This is present. This is present. Feel the way in which this is present. And what is it you're feeling when you feel this, the presence of your experience? What is it you're feeling? You're feeling something. And it feels the same, whatever it looks like. The presence does not change when your experience changes. The presence doesn't change when you go to sleep. The presence doesn't change when you're happy. The presence doesn't change when you're in pain. Presence is right here, right now. It's completely obvious and entirely subtle and transcendental. Because as obvious as it is, try and pin down what it is. You know, it's absolute no-brainer though. Yeah, this is present. Your experience is present. But look very precisely, what exactly do you mean by that? What are you referring to when you say experience is present? Try and find that present. What does that mean? What is that about?
It's almost just like a feeling, but
Well, yeah, but don't think about it. Find it. It's an actual. It's not an abstraction. It's a real thing. It's right here. You find it like putting your hand on it. Although obviously you don't need to worry about it to be something that you can put your hand on or not. I mean, I'm putting my hand on it right now. I'm putting my hand on it right now, right? So that's not very useful. But the point is, become artful and subtle in being able to recognize what it is. And you start from the obviousness. It's completely obvious that this is present. But okay, cool. So get a little more refined. You know, what is this? And you just be with that. Discover how to discover it.
yeah, so I notice it a little bit, and then I want to say what it is by comparing it to
sure. That's
something
all.
else
That's
or
fine.
making a
Oh, that's
metaphor.
fine. That's beginning stages. So that's great. Keep it up. After a while, you get bored with that, and you'll start doing other stuff. That's great. It's all great. It's all good.
You said beginning what?
I said it's beginning stages of looking.
Stages.
Stages. I heard Seva also. What?
I mumble. Sorry. Beginning seva. No Sanskrit words. So just take it further. Just keep taking it further. Yeah. When you want to practice, that's a real good practice.
Which one?
Present, find presence.
Enjoy it.
Well, finding it ultimately merges in enjoying it. But the more you find it, the more you'll enjoy it.
The presence is always the same, but radiance is always different.
Maybe look and see.
I'm not gonna give an answer to that one.
I'll tell you one thing. The way it really is can't be said. So as soon as you say something, you can cross that off the list. And say, it's not that.
Yeah. You do the math.
Because I always sort of see, well, I don't know, I get mixed up all the time, but so I sort of see radiance and presence. I get a reverse sometimes. I mean, because I never know what's coming first.
But it's absurd. There is no
first.
There is no first, and there is no radiance, and there is no presence. There's just this. Calling it radiant presence is a lie.
Yeah.
But it's a rather subtle and
Yeah,
artful lie
I
that
sort
gets
of
to
know
that
there's
gets to
something.
pretty close into it.
Yeah,
If you can get to worrying about which comes first, you're doing pretty good.
right.
I think it's break time. Why don't we take a little break?
Oh, yeah.
So we'll be back in about 10 minutes. If you're watching this video after the fact, please fast forward.
There's a bunch of ice cream, I don't know.
Where are you going?
Ice cream.
Well, I mean, there's a bunch of empty ice cream
You're
containers
very
that we should just
patriotic.
sort of, why don't we just sort of
Quite inadvertently,
scoop
right?
them all out?
Right. You put whatever's comfortable for a hot day. You're a teacher, right?
Did you see them?
Yeah.
What grade level do you teach?
Well, I teach high school and then it's
Oh, do you? What school are you at?
Okay.
Oh, nice, okay. That's great. What are the hours for that? Oh, okay. That may be very good schedule in most people. Yeah, right. You don't have that, right? What are your hours on those 3 days?
It's Friday night and then Saturday most of the day and then Sunday morning. Right now, but like the.
It is,
Yeah, cool water around the airline is quite a good idea.
yes.
Saturday afternoon and Friday night. Potentially maybe work some other hours.
No evening during the week, huh?
Well, no, let me use.
Yeah, I guess, it's, once they're done with school, they just want to go home and. Yeah, it's not-
They've all got this microphone,
Yeah.
so I'll have them write essays with more. Get to play.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, yeah, you will. Okay. Oh.
Have we started running any trains yet on the track?
What's on the ship?
December 2016.
Oh, next year, right, a long time.
We've had some trial runs.
How did that seem to you?
Quite,
Oh, great.
great fun.
Cute.
Did you
Hey,
wait?
there's some ice cream
Yeah, some
in
of the
there if you guys want. Well, most of it's real ice cream except for the Coke.
Oh, nice. Great idea.
Are you pregnant? Yeah. That was always good when we talked about it. The baby.
I like Coca-Cola, Colby crackers, and
You're in the great birthday. My wife said the food wasn't so tasty. That's pretty good.
I'm telling you, when you're pregnant, you're not feeling great, salty crackers work. Oh, yes,
And it turns into sugar,
yes.
but I usually add cinnamon. And it's pretty nice. One day,
Wait a
red
minute.
pepper.
Oh,
And it was by accident, I said it's cinnamon. I got it, cinnamon. It's actually kind of good.
I make a chili pepper rice.
You
Make
know,
chili pepper.
yeah, it was very nice. I was kind of fun.
Something wrong with my phone, I can't connect to wireless networks. Just
What?
wireless networks, you know?
Why?
I don't know why. I've been playing with it for a few days now. It just doesn't do it.
Take it into your phone your service or something.
Yeah, I have it, but
I have service up here. It's not very. It's pretty good. 3G.
yeah, I get that part. I'm talking about the wireless, like a
Oh, you mean like
Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi? Oh,
It won't hook up to Wi-Fi. And it says there's, like, I've got Xfinity, so there's all these Xfinity hotspots everywhere.
Yeah, but Xfinity is not real Wi-Fi.
What is it? What is it? Fake
No,
Wi-Fi.
no, not Wi-Fi.
Oh, so that doesn't help. Anyway, but at home, I've got a really strong Wi-Fi network in my house, right? And it's good. Computer,
What kind of phone do you have?
well, it's a Motorola Droid Max, and it has been working great.
maybe you might have changed the settings accidentally or something, or updated the software or whatever.
That's what I think. Maybe they sent me some software, or one guy said one of the apps may have updated in some way that was counterproductive. But then you don't know which apps updated when, and it doesn't give you a list.
Take it to the experts.
I was up on what I could call our cousins camp out, sort of an annual thing. Of course, all my cousins are Finnish. And the two guys, they both have Nokia phones. I think it's
Nokia?
solely, you know, and they can just hardly get anything, you know. And,
Well, they're probably good in Europe or something, huh?
well, Nokia, no, they're just, you know, they're out.
I guess old fashioned.
Yeah, they're, and actually a lot of Blackberries. I mean, you know, they're just, definitely
That was a
Nokia.
fast little cast.
They, you know, they've been transitioning. Finland's like becoming a big leader in biotechnology and you know, medical devices. And so that's really Nokia is where all my Finnish my dad's Finnish relatives are. They've sort of transitioned. And then where my mother's relatives are up near the Arctic Circle in Oulu. It's a great, Oulu. It's a great
This where
crossword puzzle word, O-U-L-U. That has become sort of like the new medical Silicon Valley of Scandinavia.
don't you have like reindeer burgers and stuff like that?
Yeah, oh, that's the you know, the Laplanders or I can't remember what they call them.
Are they Finnish or just everything? They
No, Lapland, I can't remember the I think they call them Sami. Yeah, that's sort of like, you know, the native. And, they're all throughout Norway, Sweden,
So they're like kind of like
Finland.
the Inuit
Yeah.
in California.
Yeah, the Sami people are just little different language, of course, a lot of intermarriage. So, you know, most skins, a lot of skins will look like the Sami people, other will look more Swedish. But yeah, that's the reason. Watching this wonderful, I watched this really great movie by Werner Herzog about the Russian Siberian natives called Taiga, T-A-I-G-A. This was about fur trappers. And, you know, you go out for like 5 or 6 months.
My favorite movies is this movie by Kurosawa called Dersu Usala.
What?
Dersu Usala.
Oh, yeah, when he goes, he
Yeah,
goes and.
I love that.
Yeah, that's a great movie.
And he was some sort of exotic, exotic artist, some sort of
Yeah.
person like that up in the edge of Siberia.
But interestingly, the Sami people do not, they haven't crossed, they don't cross over into the Siberian area.
Well, I think,
The ethnic groups in Russia are so many.
I think so much of that is according to terrain, and terrain then related to how they're making their living off of reindeer. Maybe reindeer don't do well in that area.
Right,
It's,
there's a really great movie, I think, from the 60s, a Russian movie, called Horses of Fire. You know, it's about people who live in the northern part of Russia, about their myths.
You know, it's the quality of their attendance.
I don't know. It's so dreamlike.
Did you see that movie about the Russians who go out to the woods every winter?
Yeah, that's what I was talking about, the Tiger movie, yeah.
What time?
They do what?
Yeah, it's called The Happy People of Tiger.
Oh, yeah, I got that on my list.
Yeah, so that's.
It's a great movie.
Very good movie.
What?
Very spiritual. So, I mean, there's a couple of things where that guy just said, oh, man, stop.
Where? Happy people.
She
Well,
does.
it's
I think it's called The
Werner
Happy People or
Herzog,
something.
but I think it's called The Happy People of the Tiger, or 1 Year with the People of the Tiger.
Yeah.
Yeah, this group.
It's on Netflix.
Yes, I'm definitely. It's a great dog movie too. A lot of things.
It's a very unpleasant life. I mean, they're out in the boonies at minus 10 degrees.
Mosquitoes as big as your head.
And then all they're doing is going around killing animals.
They're like, it's
Different lockdowns.
I go back.
Nice way to sum it up. I love
Like
it.
they go back on New Year's, for Christmas and New Year's, with their family in the village. But the village people are also snowed in. There's nothing. They
The
pick up
village
there
people
either.
get abandoned by all the men.
Well, they might maybe have some flame every once in a while.
The men?
Add to it.
Yeah, the men go out in the woods and start killing animals. They would be around for the men. Oh, good idea. Oh, I can leave it.
Yeah, it's been one.
social. Will you eat the sushi by you?
Well, my son would, sure.
Somebody will eat it. Somebody, it doesn't have to be you.
No, no, it's great, it's great, it's all good. Thank you very much. So are we up for questions? So, you know, we were talking a little bit earlier about, you know, sometimes how you're just not able to know this, or you're just not as connected with this, or recognizing it. And this reminds me, I thought about it when my granddaughter's over here. She just loves to play hide and go seek. And there's a sort of a point where the person is hidden, and then all of a sudden you just sort of, and there they are. And that's sort of how this is. And it's sort of like it's playing hide and go seek. So, you know.
Yeah, it's like how you go seek with itself.
It would, exactly, yeah, it's not me, it's the itself will recognize that it's playing kind of, find itself hiding it off and that I can find it.
Yeah, this continually splits off from itself. It continually splits off from itself and deviates, presents itself as other than it is, unstoppably.
Yeah.
And it does all these othernesses and presents all these othernesses, and yet none of these othernesses actually depart from itself. And so it's sort of the natural tide is where it follows all these othernesses out into them, and then it relaxes back into itself. Not necessarily in a simple cycle.
And the other thing is that the big me, the big I is doing. That's
Yeah.
big I.
That's what's doing everything.
That sense
I thought it was the big guy. Okay.
that sense of just appearing is really interesting, I think. And it's, I was doing my crossword the other day, and I realized it's not really like figuring out the words or anything that I like about it. It's that sense of the word or the just appearing. And that happens a lot, you know, when you're doing it. And it's kind of a delicious feeling, you know, in and of itself. So, to me, that's, this feels like that. There's like no before it, there's no, and the sense of any cause, it's just not there.
Yeah, that's its sole mode, is just appearing. That's all it ever is doing. And as it is, the more all these appearances just come with, you know, and this is doing them. So when you trust this, you don't need to trust them because it comes along with.
Yeah,
And the normal diluted mode is to try to find one of these appearances to trust, and they'll always let you down. You'll be off balance when you try and follow them.
I'm giving meaning to everything.
Huh?
I'm giving meaning to everything.
Well, at first that trusting the just appearing feels like trusting nothing. But then it doesn't feel like that either. It just is itself in some way.
Yeah. Well, that's part of what I mean by it shows you what it is. It shows you how to do it. It educates itself in how to be with itself, how to appreciate itself, value. I mean, there's no real way to put it, but you could, another way you could say is it validates itself, or through familiarity. So the more familiar you become with this, the more it intrinsically validates that familiarity. It communicates its authority, you could say.
Well, somewhere in there, there's this different sense or quality of participation that seems to happen where you just kind of, you don't need anything to be anything. It'll just be whatever. And you can, it's a kind of just like, it has a sense of flowing or dancing or something along those lines.
Absolutely, absolutely. You're with, you're with the presence, and at the same time you're with the radiance, and all these strange tides and comings and goings are you're sort of surfing on that. At the same time, you're never really losing your balance in terms of this. I mean, the whole thing, it's very ambiguous. Yeah, it's very ambiguous. No, yeah. Well, ultimately you can't. That's realization when you see that this cannot be lost, and only all losings of it is it. It can be found more than it can be lost, though. Because anything that's found is it.
So what do they do before technology invented screens and movies and TVs? They talk about waves.
Well, they had thorns and they had shadows on the cave being cast by the fire, and they had, the metaphors changed, but the principles are actually absolutely archetypal now. So technology can just go through the roof forever, and the principles will be the same.
Right.
In terms of illustrating, no new principles are going to come into existence. The technology just exploits the inherent principles with greater and greater subtlety and amazingness.
The technology was the interplay between oral and the ear, and sound, or like Homer. I mean, his poetry probably excited all kinds of visions.
In Tibet, there were a lot of metaphors that were used in terms of the way prisms would refract light, the way mirrors would reflect images, and so on and so forth, all of which can be used to illustrate the same, to convey the same notions.
Gosh, now you're making me wonder when mirrors came into existence.
Well, it's on, when eyes came into existence, mirrors came into existence because of water.
Right.
Standing water is a mirror.
Was he on purpose? Cutting a piece of glass to make that do that.
Yeah, well, when they discovered materials like glass or materials like metals, Bronze Age, they started making bronze mirrors. And I suppose when glass was discovered, glass mirrors may have been discovered. Yeah, there's if you look at an archaeological, artifacts, there's bronze mirrors you can find.
Wow.
The basic trip out.
But it comes from water originally, probably.
Right.
He's a guy narcissistic, we call him. Environment. So, fascinating with this.
It's just funny, suddenly I'm interested in things that I never thought I'd be interested in that are physical.
Narcissus is a wonderful myth. It's the same myth as the Garden of Eden, basically in different terms.
He fell in love with his own reflection.
Yeah, which is a myth of the nature of delusion, where one begins to identify with objects of experience rather than with experience itself. Which is the essential basis of ignorance in the spiritual sense.
Right.
Or partialities is in the way we were talking about. When you identify with partialities, you lose the context that produces the partialities, which of course is what's actually going on.
But there's this other thing with the Narcissus myth of romantic love, right?
Yeah.
And the sort of delusion that is sprung from that.
Well, it's the same thing. Romantic love is about projecting the object of desire objectively.
And then also making distinctions in terms of my beloved is the most beautiful.
Right. And as soon as you're making distinctions, I mean, that goes right to the Garden of Eden, where you're eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is basically just making distinctions, which is how you get kicked out of the garden. But all these myths are just talking about that they're communicating the same principle, the principle of relating to actuality comprehensively, or mistakenly identifying with partial aspects of actuality as being the whole thing, which is what all problems come from, and all solutions come from remedying that by identifying with what's actually here. It's like in a dream. The solution to any dream is to discover that you're dreaming. If you think, oh gosh, I'm having this horrible nightmare, I got to change it into a good dream. You don't need to change it into a good dream. Just see that it's a dream, and it will no longer matter. Well, you wake up, or it'll no longer matter that it's a nightmare, because who gives a shit? It's a dream. So the same thing happens. When you're lost in a dream and it becomes problematic one way or another, it's because you're identifying with the partial images of the dream as being actual, as being important, as having any importance in themselves, as opposed to just being arbitrary projections of something that is completely beyond and independent of the projections. So the projections are rendered completely irrelevant. If a monster is chasing you in a dream, and when you know it's a dream, who gives a shit? Because there's no monster and it's not chasing you. It just looks that way. In exactly the same way, when you see what's actually happening here, all of these images, these partial images that present as apparent circumstances and entities and so on, are seen to be essentially irrelevant in terms of what's actually going on.
Peter, this noticing or not noticing. I think it's, more familiar with practice. The yoga. And most of the time now when I start thinking about it, it just, it's in my face, it just comes. I mean, I don't have to do much.
No, well, noticing is a trick for beginners.
Yeah,
because there's actually no such thing as not noticing.
yeah, right,
But you have to discover what noticing is
yeah,
in order to discover that there's no not noticing.
right. So, yeah, exactly. So I guess what's happening now is, just shit happens.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You discover that
Always.
when you discover the mode of what noticing is, you discover that's the only mode, that's the only
Yeah.
game in town,
Yeah,
and there's no such thing as not noticing.
right,
And even when you thought you were not noticing in the old days, you weren't really.
right.
And so all of that is, it dissolves under the weight of its own non-existence.
Yeah.
But it's a very useful trick for beginners, because until you find noticing, you're at sea. But as soon as you find noticing, then you have your foot in the door.
No, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Until you find, when the door you what?
You're at sea. You're just
At sea. I see, I didn't hear what you said, at sea.
you're lost in the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. To get Shakespearean. Lost in Samsara.
Some other Shakespeare to throw it out, I would enjoy it.
I don't know what is lost in many seas and anything, but.
Well, it's not actually.
Yeah, no.
But discovering that it's not actually is the point.
Yeah, but even if it's not discovered, it's still not lost.
That's correct.
So what does discovery got to do with the price of ice?
Enjoyment, appreciation.
Yeah, nobody's something. Somehow, enjoyment, food, like it enjoys itself, whether it's like having a good time or not, It's just.
It's completely irrelevant. It's only relevant if it's relevant. None of this stuff matters unless it matters. And if it matters, you're free to pursue it and then discover that it doesn't matter. I mean, that's why there's no point proselytizing, because it's not like ignorance is bad, all your people need to be saved. That's an absurdity. And yet, if you are a person who feels like ignorance is bad and you have a bee in your bonnet about it, then it's possible to look into it and discover, solve that issue by discovering what's actually going on here. And having done that, you'll discover that you didn't actually need to do that. But you'll know for a fact you didn't need to, and the whole problem is solved.
But karmically, you needed to do it,
Oh, sure, whatever, right? Yeah, sure.
So what's your interest in providing your teaching?
I don't know.
Entertainment?
I don't know. Maybe.
I think so. That and potlucks, lunches, dinners,
Company.
Good eating, you could say.
Shot.
have chai will travel.
No, when you begin to look at why does anything happen, why does motivation arise,
Yeah, really.
eventually you can't answer any of those questions. So it's ultimately we're completely pointless to ask them.
It's as unresolvable as anything else.
Yeah.
But
Yes,
Realization happens too,
Yes.
it does.
and that's good enough reason.
Good enough for me.
Some people don't come. It's not good enough for them.
You say that you awaken from dream by seeing that it's a dream,
Huh?
and then you awaken from partiality of circumstance. You also say that you awaken to seeing that you are awareness itself.
Well, I don't actually say that.
I know you don't, so I'm just,
One can say that.
For your perspective,
Uh-huh.
to say that, not only are you awakened from the impartiality of circumstance,
Right.
but you also see that you are awareness. You're no longer just this partiality.
Right.
You're awareness itself.
Sure. Yeah, you can say that. I mean, I don't particularly like to use the word awareness because it implies, well, it implies that it is awareness as opposed to something else. What it is, it cannot be said. It certainly includes what we might think of as awareness or consciousness or something, but you know, it is absolute mystery. It also includes inertness, inertia. It includes just objective, apparitions. So, the problem with awareness implies awareness as opposed to, or as polarized, as a polar extreme from objects of experience. And there is no such polarity.
Well, you are that which enables the recognition of presence.
Yes. Yes, good.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Which is presence itself.
Yeah. As opposed to being a partiality of that
Yes.
which you identify with, and that's all the.
Yes. And the implication of that, when you're identifying with partialities seem to be dependent upon other partialities and other circumstances. But when you discover that you are that which all partialities depend upon, you discover you're independent of all these partialities. And so the investment of urgency and importance in the condition of these apparent partialities is drained.
So that independence, that area of independence, I mean, that's the real liberation.
Yes, absolutely.
From the partiality.
Yes,
But the seeing and the actual liberation, there's some real seeing there.
absolutely.
That is,
Definitely, real seeing.
more than a knowing of it.
Well,
Experience of it, and
it conveys itself self-verifyingly and authoritatively. And in that self-verifying conveyance, there's no doubt. So whether you call it a seeing or a knowing, or I was just splitting hairs. But when you see what it is, it verifies itself that it actually is that, and its relationship to all the partialities is verified too. I mean, the whole thing becomes quite crystal clear. It's not, in other words, it's not a theory or a possibility.
Right. But it's also not an ongoing recognition. I mean, it's kind of there in the background, but it's not necessarily
Continuous?
modus operandi.
Oh, absolutely. It doesn't. Yeah, but it is always the case. And when it's recognized, it is recognized that it is always the case, whether or not it's being actively recognized in the moment.
But there can be an element of it being a modus operandi, in other words, of being
absolutely.
constantly in your
Oh, certainly.
subconscious. Because I know sometimes I find myself questioning where is all the activity coming from, or it occurs to me, I don't know that I question it so much as, I'm not putting this well, but where I see myself as on the stage, sense.
Sure.
And there's something going on, but I don't have any attachment to it.
Sure.
And so, but it's still happening, and I'm kind of like a voyeur, if anything. And even that is description.
Sure.
But it is a modus operandi because that's all there is.
Sure. And that's the way to put it. There's a lot of ways to put it,
Yeah.
but the actual nature of this actuality is recognizable, is discoverable, it conveys itself self-verifyingly and with authority. And in that self-verifying authority, that it is always the case is also conveyed, whether or not it's being actively recognized in the moment as being the case. When you recognize it, you recognize that it is always the case, which is the nature of realization. It's not like once you realize you need to sit around and stay realized. You know, you can go to a tearjerker movie and get all sucked up in it and get weepy or something. But even when that happens, you know what this is. If you are what this is, and you have always been what this is, and all of that sort of falls together in the recognition. But you don't need to stay with it.
Well, there's not a sense of being divided.
Exactly so. There's no more division. Even when there's nothing but division presenting. There's always nothing but incoherence presenting, but none of the incoherence actually divides anything or creates any separation.
Well, what about that instance of seeing yourself, watching, and still seeing as watching?
But I don't know.
In terms of no division, not being divided.
These are just modes in which it can present. It doesn't matter.
None of them are actually accurate.
Yeah. And all these different modes and different psychological orientations can seem to present, but those are all just modes that occur within this. They aren't actual.
So once distinguishes them.
Yeah, exactly so. Because they are all just this, and they don't deviate from this one tiny bit, whatever they look like. So all sorts of psychological conditions, subjective experiential conditions can occur of, all the strange apparent orientations that psychology or whatever, what have you, psychological conditions can seem to fall into or whatever can occur, but all of that is nothing other than modes of the radiance and in no way departs from this condition. Those are just ways that it can look like that. I mean, the rule of thumb for any condition, in contrast with any other condition, is that this can look like anything, but it never departs from itself. So this is always exactly this, and it never becomes anything other than this. But it can look like absolutely anything. So all of these apparent conditions can seem to be present and occurring, but all of them are actually nothing other than this, and they don't depart from this one iota. Just like a dream can look like absolutely anything, but it never departs from just dreaming. There's only one thing happening, whatever it looks like. And so you stop orienting to whether or not it looks like this or that as having any importance or relevance whatsoever, because whatever it looks like, it is nothing other than this.
So sort of our normal orientation of what we've learned through like Western thought is that, the modes or consciousness, say talk about Freudian psychology, whatever, it's all it's all psychological. But I mean, I've discovered modes that are totally foreign to my psyche, or what I think my human. I mean, is that my imagination, or is that, or what am I?
Well, it's unclassifiable, but this presents as infinite modes, most of which are not acknowledged within human classifications.
And even like I've been doing some stuff with lucid dreaming, and I've discovered that before I used to interpret my dream like with Jungian psychology and all, or whatever, but there are some dreams that don't quite fit into that. And certainly a lot of my experiences with, psychedelics, that sort of transcended the psyche too. It's just so weird. I mean,
because everything ultimately transcends the psyche.
Yeah.
Because all phenomena that are appearing, even phenomena that are phenomena of psychology,
Right.
psychological functioning, or biological, neurological functioning, are actually radiance.
Yeah, I mean, I can
And
rest
so,
in a lot of
which is
that
not,
for most of the time and I certainly did in most of my life. It was totally comfortable. It's all cool.
yeah, it doesn't matter because there's no division.
Right.
It's not like this, the line between psychology and trans-psychology, or biological and trans-biological, or material and trans-material, because it's all the same thing. And these sort of boundaries or horizons between these different states are arbitrary classifications and aren't actual, because it's all a continuous spectrum of the same thing. Everything that appears is made of one thing. So there are differences and divergences in the way things seem to appear and the way they seem to orient, just illustrates the different modes of this one thing.
Yeah.
So it can look like psychology, it can look like biology, it can look like material functioning, it can look like, beyond space and time, transcendental, what have you. And all of which is like, so what?
Yeah, well, what I was trying to say is that, this thing about psyche or psychology, it was so comfortable, and once it becomes too comfortable, then it can become sort of a little bit of a trap, and then you don't see other stuff.
Yeah, well, that's the pitfall of orienting to any partiality.
Right.
It's it can become exclusive to some degree, and then it becomes a tunnel vision. But even tunnel vision is a major mode of the radiance. So even in tunnel vision, you aren't cut off from anything.
Yeah.
It seems like the biggest partiality is caring about what happens to me.
Well, ultimately, if you look at that closely, it's caring about what happens to you is actually a symptom of and dependent upon having a definition of you. And any definition you have of you is wrong. So the trick is to discover what you actually are, and then you discover that what that turns out to be is invulnerable and independent, so you don't need to care about what happens to it, because nothing can happen to it.
So it's more of a result than like letting go of that is more of a result of discovering what you really are, rather than...
Yeah, when you see what this is, then all misdefinitions are disproved and invalidated inherently. You don't need to dismantle them or let go of them. They're just to say, boy, I thought it was like that. Boy, was I wrong. And at that point, those concerns and the implication, the urgency and importance they seem to have, just dissolve. Because you see that, oh, it's not really like that. That's not really me. So it doesn't really matter what happens to that. And even more complexly and subtly, it doesn't even matter if you care about what happens to that.
Well, that's true too.
So, the subtleties are infinite. But when you discover what this is and recognize what it is, anything other than that, or any implication of that, is rendered as having essentially no importance in itself. So that you identify yourself as being a certain way, and that you care about that identification, and that this and that is all like, who cares? It just is rendered irrelevant. So when you see what this is, it renders everything else irrelevant without negating it. It doesn't necessarily negate it. And in the irrelevancy, you may drop it entirely, or you may just stay with it. It's like when you're in a dream and you go lucid in a dream and you recognize you're dreaming, you might wake up, or you might change your dream, and you might just keep on dreaming the dream. Because at that point it doesn't matter what you do because it's just a dream. So who cares? But any importance the dream seems to have had before you went lucid is gone because if it's just a dream, who cares? That's why in realization, some people, stop speaking and wear a diaper and and they
God,
won't
I don't want that to happen.
they won't eat. Well, early days
You
yet.
never know.
Okay, I quit.
And they don't eat
No,
unless
really.
someone feeds them. And other people are gluttons and sensualists. But the point is, it's irrelevant
Right.
because it's what you do or don't do is not the point. It's discovering the true perspective. It doesn't really matter what you do or don't do.
Right.
And that discovery hinges upon the actuality of the discovery, not on aspiring to it or pretending to it or simulating it or something. But when you see what this is, that validates itself and it puts everything else in perspective. And you can generally say that everything that we as humans and human psychology think of as importance is completely irrelevant. And that becomes obvious in the discovery. It becomes obvious in the recognition.
So it goes back to what we talked about, is that when you see what this is.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's, how does one see what this is?
But one sees what this is by letting go of of looking at it in terms of what you're used to thinking of it as being, because what it is unthinkable. So, in our historical mode, we're used to thinking of it as being a certain thing, and we're used to looking at it in terms of what we think of it as being. And as long as we do that, it's unlikely that we're going to recognize, not necessarily impossible, but it's more unlikely that we're going to recognize what it is. But if you can find yourself outside that context of expectation, outside the context of any mental modeling, i.e. in what I call noticing, then you're with experience outside the context of interpretation. And in that context, what it is becomes very clear. Although it has a learning curve, perhaps, because what it is so strange and so nonlinear with regard to anything that we're familiar with in terms of our human categories, as at first it might not be recognizable or assimilatable whatsoever because it's, it just seems like nothing or just seems like weirdness. But when one becomes familiar with it, acclimated to it, then one discovers that what seems to be unfathomable, irrational weirdness is in fact something that's very specifically itself, and very specifically itself in the way that it is that, and is in fact everything, and is in fact you, and the totality of reality, and so on and so forth. And that's recognition. But it's definitely greatly facilitated by being able to find yourself outside of, or at least somewhat suspended from, your customary categorizations and expectations of what things are. Well, pretty much. I'm pretty much a one-trick pony. I am a one-note man. I play it all I can.
So, I mean, that calls into observation of how the mind comes into play.
Sure.
So it's like observing how the mind is, or how an interpretation is just coming into trying to control or assess what's
You
happening.
observe that, but more to the point, you observe the context in which that occurs. Like, for example, if you're suppose you're in an art museum and you're looking at some abstract painting, just some blobs of color or whatever. You first look at it and you're absolutely referenceless and you don't know anything. And then the mind will come in and start doing its Rorschach blot of, oh, maybe that's a mailbox with a bird perched on it. Or maybe it's a snow shovel. Or maybe that's George Washington, or, you know, whatever. But at first, it wasn't. And that's the interesting condition. That's where noticing happens. Noticing is accessing that first contact of perception that has no interpretation. And that, in fact, is always going on, because under the layer of interpretation, there is always uninterpreted experience occurring. And whether you see it as sequentially, as seeing something and then having an association or whatever, is irrelevant. But in actual fact, it's always occurring. So that layer or mode, you might say, of experience is in fact always available. So even if interpreting happens up here, but direct experience is happening over here, sort of in a different strata.
No, I mean, just being able to see that before that happens.
Yeah, well, before, if you're doing it sequentially, but even if there's interpreting happen, the uninterpreted experience is also present.
Yes.
And it can be possible to tune into that, like tuning a radio, without suppressing the interpretation. Like, you know, when you're looking at color, the perception of color is not an interpretation. It's entirely beyond interpretation. And even if interpretation is happening, while the perception of color is happening, the perception of color is also happening while the interpretation is happening. And the perception of color is entirely outside of a realm of interpretation. It's entirely mysterious. It's entirely unfathomable and yet actual. And that's where recognition happens. And so noticing becomes, you know, a sensitivity exercise of being able to appreciate and tune into that strata of experience, either artfully or by accident or by tricks or however you do it. You have to, but the main thing is you have to stumble onto it subjectively for yourself. And then once you can do that with some degree of facility or luck or what have you, then you can begin to explore what's there in its own terms, you know, irrationally and non-conceptually and so on, because that level of experience is irrational, is non-conceptual.
It's really interesting to notice that there's been a reaction to something that you weren't even conscious of.
Oh, yeah.
This whole symphony has already started.
Oh, yeah. No, the mind is insidious. It's amazing.
It's just a storyteller.
It is
Well,
that.
I mean, this stuff affecting you in some way that you there's so much going on that you're not necessarily aware of it. It's really powerful.
Oh, yeah.
So much so that, I mean, even people with music now, it does, I mean, it's just so much happening that affects us.
Yeah. Well, experience is the naked, raw presence of energy fields. And the energy fields are very broad bandwidth and as a constant barrage. I mean, the barrage of color and light and sound and all and thought and just all of these energies that are just continually, nakedly, you know, bombarding within experience.
But I know what it was, I was doing these Qigong exercises, and they said, okay, if you want to do it for this, and this, and this, you follow this direction. If you want to do it for this issue, and you follow this direction. This, and then, you know, you turn and you go in this direction. I couldn't believe it. And then the whole field changed just because of the direction. Yeah.
Sure.
It was mind-boggling. I mean, that kind of subtleness is just really interesting.
Oh, yeah. You know, you can explore these things. You know, you can explore the the flavors of direction. You know, in Western occultism, there's lots of work with that kind of thing. Well, in Tibetan Tantra too, they orient the elements with the directions and so on, and that's that's palpable. You know, when you feel the flavor of direction, it's something there. And so, I mean, it's just arbitrarily out of an infinite range of things one could specify.
And would you say that your experience of this has a feeling tone, specific feeling tone, or is it just, I mean, I know that it's variable, but do you have a sense that there is some tone that returns again and again?
Well, in a way, I would say there's definitely a tone of what I would call meanness. My flavor.
Yes.
The flavor of my karma or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
But I couldn't say what that is.
Yeah.
And that I couldn't say that has a limited range of ways it can present.
Right.
But I would say in a sense, definitely.
Because I noticed that as I look more deeply into that recently, that there is this maintenance that shows up, and then it's sort of inescapable, so the only way in which I can transform my relationship with that experience is to reframe it, in a sense, to not be like, oh God, there it is again.
Right.
To be doing that, like, wow.
Yeah, because it is a meanness, but it's actually not personal, it's transcendental.
Yes.
And when you discover that your you-ness doesn't come from you,
Yes.
your you-ness, on the contrary, is just sort of your
The universal you.
yeah, in a way. Well, it's your axis, it's your North Star or what have you,
Well, it's
your
always
orientation.
been there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Unmistakably, as a child, there was the universe.
Yeah. And we interpret that, we personalize it, interpret it as us, and we interpret it as our personality. But those are all just more or less superficial aspects of it. But the same thing goes all the way.
Yeah.
And I would say that's definitely the case. But even putting it like that is a little heavy-handed, because it is universal, and I can't possibly qualify it at all. But it's very interesting the way it is what it is.
But the chances of yourness and mineness being the same are, well, there's no way of knowing.
No.
Well, it's interesting. I think in a sense, there's no way to put it, but to put it inaccurately, but with some degree of meaning. I think there's a sense in which, like, you are you uniquely, and I am me uniquely, but also at core we are the same.
Absolutely.
And yet there's absolute divergence and uniqueness every step of the way somehow, and you can't actually map that or say how that works.
It seems to me when I look at my universe that there is something about that which is shaped by my experience.
Well, they're one. Your experience and your units are a hologram.
It's a chicken and the egg.
Given the place I was born, my parents and my situation has influenced the way I perceive the meanness.
Yeah, but your units put that stuff there.
Oh yeah, I just put it there.
And it's all aligned. You could say it's aligned with your units.
Well, it's like a dream, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like when you wake and you realize, like,
I don't think there's any meaningful way to find what's causing what. It's just it's all
No,
vibrating.
but there is a knowledge that there's only one.
Yes, absolutely.
There's only one, and so it doesn't matter what my parents and your parents and whatever. There is only one, and yet to me, feel unique.
Oh yeah, there's only one, and it's me.
It's me.
And there's only one, and it's you.
No, there's only one that's me.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I was trying to describe before, that sometimes I see this character, which is shaped by all the experiences it's had, but it's like a character on the stage and has been given costumes and a script and all that stuff, and all of that has influenced the storyline for that particular character on the screen or on the stage, but there is something else that's universal that sees all the characters as itself and sees all the stages as itself, or I don't know how to describe it, is not taking the character personally.
Right. I don't think
And
it's,
yet it's unique, and
Right.
that's the role that's playing through
Yeah.
the years.
I don't think it's something else though. I think it's a degree of the same
It's not
thing.
something else.
And you can't express,
Well, I know,
you can't express
but
the way
we're trying to describe two different
trying to
sensations
describe
or.
the undescribable.
Right,
But there is, ultimately, there's only one thing.
Yeah.
there's a certain
And-
definite unicity.
And whatever your head comes up with, it is that.
And the point in practical point is, when you recognize this, when you recognize actuality, you discover all that. You discover yourself, you discover this, you discover this comprehensiveness, and all of that conveys itself very clearly and very self-verifying.
And yet, that discovery is also that it's meaningless.
Well, sure.
And it's what?
Meaningless.
Oh.
And meaningful.
Well,
It's
it's like meaning just breaks down, the whole meaning of meaning.
The notion, the human notion of meaning is absurd.
Right.
Yeah.
You really don't need it, it's
It
much
sort of
more
becomes
interesting.
You don't
the
need it.
point, doesn't it? Yeah. In terms of why we're doing what we're doing.
No need for meaning when there's so much to see, and to look at, and experience, and sense, and.
Who needs meaning when there's good food, right?
Who needs meaning when
And on that
there's-
note, it's quitting time, so good night, everybody.
When there's wine, song,